What it do? Three Dudes Fantasy Football Podcast coming at you. Steven and Aaron, our fearless leader, JJ, is off today. Unfortunately, not feeling great.
Yeah,
So you
two
get the
dudes.
you get two dudes of the three today. Today we are going a little bit different. We're doing something a little fun today. We are talking about fantasy football 101. So this show is going to be the one that you can share to all of your friends who haven't played fantasy before, and hopefully you guys who have still find something useful out of this. We're just going to go over some basic fantasy football knowledge that you should know, and keywords, and how to play fantasy. So, Aaron, how are you today?
Doing good. Doing good. How about you, man? It's been a while.
It has. It's been a little bit. Feeling good though. Helped
It's
help
good.
my wife get her classroom all set up. So
Oh
I'm
yeah,
ready.
that's
I'm I'm ready to talk fantasy football.
is
So,
next week, man.
oh, I know.
Summer flew by.
It did. It did. All right. Well, let's get into this today. So let's start with something simple, right? Let's talk about this. Why do you play fantasy football?
Why? That's a great question. I would say what really had gravitated me to fantasy football is kind of like two things. It's like one, it's like I wanted to be able to watch more football other than just the team, I cheer for. And then the other aspect of it is, fairly competitive at things I like to, be, and that's kind of right where fantasy football is. So,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you can be at the couch coach, right? And I don't have to ever leave, but still be competitive.
right. So it's,
Um, I agree. But I also play fantasy football because I get to see a bunch of people that otherwise I wouldn't see, right?
yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, you, JJ, you guys we were friends 17 years ago, and if 18 years ago, if this league didn't exist, I wouldn't see you guys near as much.
Hmm.
But there's also other people I see once a year on draft day, so I love that it gives me a chance to get together with people that were important in my life at some point,
Right.
and I still get to see them. So fantasy football it's fun, it's competitive, but it's also a great reason to get together and talk junk. Like JJ, JJ would be on here and he would say to beat your friends at fantasy. Like he just
Mhm.
wants to beat out everybody. So all right. All right. Well, let's dive into this. So I wanted to get into some of the keywords for fantasy football because these are things that we hear all the time. We talk about, right? And we act as if everybody knows what all these words mean, but if we're being honest, the first time Sarah ever heard me say PPR, she had no clue what I was talking about,
Oh yeah.
right? So on the bottom, you'll see some of the keywords, and those are just going to be our acronyms. But Aaron and I are really going to dive into a lot of the words, right? So, um, Aaron, I'm going to let you start us off with just the basics: the PPR, the ADP, the half point PPR standard. Like, get us into when you hear those words. What does a standard league mean? What is a PPR league?
Yeah, we'll start with PPR. PPR's, relatively simple. It's points per reception, and it is 1 point per reception by whoever's catching the ball. And you know that stat where catches are recorded, it's a point for fantasy, and on top of everything else like yards, touchdowns, etc. So that one's simple, straightforward, 1 full point, which is adds up. So um
Quickly.
yeah, half point PPR is what it sounds like. It's half a point instead. So it's a balance kind of in between what would standard would be, which would just be yardage. So standard would be yardage, receiving yards and
Touchdowns.
touchdowns, and yes, exactly, all that stuff. So um that's kind of when you see those PPR, half point, and standard on that scoring, it's like something to pay attention to, when you're joining a league, because it does change aspects of the league and how your draft is going to go and what players are valued more. So
Which
it
is, I mean, we're definitely going to get into that part too, right? Where how standard, how your scoring is going to dictate how you draft, and we are going to get into that. But those are important things, right? And we talk about all the time. We kind of live in a PPR world, but those
Mhm.
other leagues do exist. So it's important to know, like when we say in a standard league or in a PPR league, what we're talking about is point per reception or a league that doesn't reward for points. So even though we kind of believe points per reception leagues or PPRs are the standard now. Standard league means you're going to get points for yards, you're going to get points for touchdowns. That's it.
Yep.
Now, a couple of other things that you're going to hear us say all the time: ADP. ADP is just average draft position.
Yeah.
Usually, when we're talking about that, we're just saying this guy is normally going at pick whatever. So if I say his ADP is 15, I'm saying he's the 15th overall player off the board. Usually, that's his average. Couple other things, just basic stuff, right? That is important. QB, quarterback, RB, running back,
Running back, wide
WR,
receiver.
wide
Yep.
receiver,
WR, tight end.
TE, tight ends, DST. So this one gets a lot of people. DST actually stands for defense and special teams. So if you draft with defense and special teams, they can get touchdown points if the special teams unit scores a touchdown. So it is important to kind of remember that part, defense and special teams for DST. And then you're going to hear us say things like flex, which usually means when you hear flex, it's just a position on your roster where you can start a running back, a wide receiver, or a tight end.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
not locked into the position, one
yeah,
position.
I can put anybody on my roster in there, except for quarterbacks. And if you hear super flex, that's when we start talking about every position on your roster can go in that spot, which notoriously, when you hear super flex, you should be starting a quarterback there because they on average, get the most points.
Yeah,
Uh,
generally.
so the other kind of leagues you'll hear, so that's when you hear leagues, they'll say super flex or 2 quarterback, or you might hear 3 wide receiver league or a 2 wide receiver league. That's all they're talking about. So if you hear us say super flex, we're talking about 2 quarterback leagues. If you hear us say 2 quarterbacks, that means you literally are starting 2 quarterbacks.
Hmm.
It's not a super flex or a position I can start anything. It's you're starting 2 quarterbacks.
Right.
Um,
There is
Now,
one more too. I
yeah,
wanted to
shoot.
mention IDP,
Oh, yeah,
and
we play in an IDP league.
yeah, that one's fun. So, individual defensive player, instead of running defense special teams, you are running individual defensive players. It may be to certain positions depending on your league. Some are kind of like a flex. You could play anybody at defense, but you have to, essentially on these ones, you can start a defensive back. You have to start, a D lineman or a linebacker, something like that. That's generally what IDP is. So that one is an important one when you see that because that's a whole nother ball game in a
Animal.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and if we're being honest, if you're just starting off in fantasy, an IDP league is probably not the league for you.
No.
Not saying you can't win, and if you listen to our show, I'm sure we can get you through it. But when you first start doing a fantasy, IDP is kind of more advanced because as you get deeper into rounds, you're going to start not knowing players, right? It's really easy in the beginning because you're drafting, Travis Kelsey's and Patrick Mahomes. But as you get deeper, you're starting to look at, Devin Singletaries, and then deeper than that, you might be trying to take the fourth wide receiver on, you know, New York. So
Mhm.
it's, you might draft Alan Lazard because that's how deep you're at. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you hear, hey, this is an IDP league, and if you're relatively new to fantasy, might not be the best league to start off on. Those are the leagues that can frustrate and make managers quit quickly. And that's not what we're here for. We want to help you enjoy the game we love, right? Fantasy
Yeah.
football is something I love. It's one of my passions, and I know Aaron is. We're doing a show on it. I know you love it.
Yeah.
So we're hoping we can get more people to join us, right? Because the more it grows, the more fun it is.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And
Um,
I would say with the IDP, it generally for someone that's coming into that, it's tougher. People look at rankings, everyone does,
yep.
but to find IDP rankings that are really good, it's very minimal. So,
Yeah,
um,
Fantasy Pros is really the only one I kind of trust.
yeah, 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 they pull
Um,
in what they can.
so you are going to hear normal leagues, right? So a normal league draft. So just to give you different perspectives, a draft, right? A normal draft is going to be you're going to log on to your computer usually. You're going to pick players based off of where you're picking. There are other leagues out there, auction leagues. um, is the most common one outside of a standard draft. Auction leagues are where you put a player up for bid, and then everybody gets to bid on that player. So you get a standard budget of usually $100 to $200, and that's all the money you get to bid on players. So you can end up with a very stacked team, right? I could take Christian McCaffrey, CeeDee Lamb, and Tyreek Hill, but then that's probably my
Yeah.
whole team. Like, I'm not drafting anybody else except for dollar players, and I'm not doing anything for a long time. I love auction leagues. However, I'm good for one because they are very long. Those drafts usually take 3 to 4 hours, where a normal draft is going to take you 45 minutes to an hour at most, depending on how big your league is.
Yeah, depending on how big your league is, if it's actually an in-person draft or you guys, online drafting, that is one thing to consider. The amount of time, because I do have a live draft and it still takes literally
Yeah.
4 hours, it seems like, because
Well,
everyone
that's
wants to
because everybody's sitting there talking, and
take a break and it's like,
yeah,
oh man, I thought too hard for the last 3 rounds. I gotta take. I'm like, come on, man.
that's when the alcohol starts to kick in. Um, So, a couple other, just a few more words to know. So, you have streaming. When we talk about streaming a position, we're just talking about you are not taking a player high up on the list. So maybe you're not taking a very high tight end. And we're just saying week to week, you're probably going to pick up a tight end and put him in your lineup, whoever he's playing a good matchup.
Yep.
We also talk about streaming defensive DSTs, defense and special teams, a lot because week to
Got a
week,
great
you never
matchup.
know. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. You're not as concerned about having a great defense special teams. You kind of want to stream them. So if you hear us say that, that's all we're talking about. Uh, Two last ones, Fab, right? Free agent acquisition budget. That is a more advanced stat. There's a waiver wire, which is you put in however your league dictates it, but you go in, you put in, this is the player I want to claim, and then when waivers run, if you're high enough, that player comes to you. Free a fab or free agent acquisition budget, you're bidding on that player. So I might say I want that player, and I'm going to put 25 of my $100 budget on there, and then you'll get them if you're the highest bidder. These are all after the draft, though. These are things after week one. Usually, your waiver wire or the players that weren't taken in the draft are sitting there, and that's what you're using these for. So, Fab is just to bid on a free agent that still hasn't been signed on any of the fantasy teams, and a normal waiver wire. And then those are like the most common, unless Aaron can think of anything else, acronyms or anything that's like, hey, these are just important things that we use commonly, but nobody gets to hear.
Oh, yeah, there'll be one thing on scoring. You'll see RET for return yards. That is one thing, if your league allows it. Players that do play special teams and return kickoffs or punts, if they have scoring for yardage, you can get points that way, and you will see that. Um, One thing too, before I lose track of this, on waivers, pay attention to the waiver order. That will help a little bit if you're in like a standard waiver wire league, you're kind of seeing where you're at, especially if you're starting to get crazy on the waiver wire and adding stuff, you'll be at
You'll
the
move.
back of
Yeah.
the pack. So kind of, even if you're in last place, that's like, pay attention to that. That what it's important, because a lot of people don't realize that, and they'll get mad at like, well,
I
I,
can't
I
seem to
haven't
get these
won. I
players. Yeah.
haven't won yet, and it's like, well, yeah, you've exchanged your whole team on waivers, so you, you've moved to the back. So that
Right.
is.
That's a good one. That is a good one. All right. So well, let's keep moving on. So this is an important part of, right? You know all the keywords now. What's the first thing you should do when you join a league? So, Aaron, what is the first thing you do when you join a new league?
Mine would probably be to either one, it's two parts again. Talk to your commissioner that you joined to and learn scoring. Make sure that you understand the scoring aspects of it and how the league is, designed. There's a lot of times where I see new managers come in and they just assume that it's like every other league, without, and they've kind of been told at times, hey, this is what we do. Hey, but there are small details. So it is one thing that personally I would do in every single league that you join. Just make sure that you check things out with the commissioner and check out scoring and all of that. So size of your league too matters.
Yeah, that's true. Size especially. I actually 100% agree with that. So, I think you should always check the settings, right? You should go in and see how are they scoring. Is this a super flex? Is this a two quarterback? Is this a point per reception league? Is this three wide receiver league? I want to know as much about the league as possible, but I do agree with asking the commissioner because every league is going to have specific rules based off of interactions that they've ran into. So
Hmm.
as we're a keeper league, which I guess should have been in our keywords. We are
Oh
a
yeah.
keeper league. Yeah, we are a keeper league. And what we do is you get to keep one player from your last year's roster for a round in the draft. So we keep a player, we determine before the next season starts what that value for that player is, and that's where you keep that player for the next year. Um, but every league determines their keepers differently. So if you're joining a
Mhm.
keeper league, it's important to know, like, well, how do you determine your keepers and how long can I keep this player? Um, but
Yeah, and
that's
that
just our league, right? There's I'm sure a ton of other leagues, and you can probably speak to this, where there's little rules that you can't find in the settings and that kind of stuff that the commissioner has in their head. Or
yeah, and it totally happens. I even have one that it looks like it's a super flex, but it's our commissioner just hasn't wanted to change it out to, you know, just a regular flex. So it's a rule like don't put a quarterback in there or else. It's like,
yeah,
come on, man. So
uh,
it's
I
like there's weird things that happen like that. So
I played in a league where it was a two quarterback, or I'm sorry, one quarterback, two running backs, and two receivers, um, and then a flex. But you couldn't have more than four wide receivers on your roster, which
no,
which meant that I had to have two quarterbacks, I had to have four wide receivers, I had to have four running backs, I had to have two kickers and two defenses. So there was roster limitations that you can't see in the settings. I can't see that, but they were very clear about that, right? So every league is going to have their own rules, and it is important to kind of get with the commissioner and go, what are the specific rules for this league that
yeah,
maybe I should know?
and
So
look at the roster size too, because it's like I'm a commissioner in a league that for some reason it's only 6 people, so I got to make it challenging. So it's something that I do where it's like it's a limited roster and you're starting a varying position. So two quarterbacks and yeah, it's
I
leagues are
play.
different.
I do play in a small league like that where we start two quarterbacks and a super flex and four running backs and four wide receivers because
Yeah,
there's the league's
there's
so
there's so
small. Might
much.
as well, yeah, might as well. But yeah, it's important, right? Get with your commissioner. Look at your league settings. Figure out that stuff, right?
There,
Don't ask the commissioner the simple questions that you could do the research on, right? You can
yep.
go see if it's a PPR. You can
Hmm.
see if it's running backs or two running backs or three wide receivers. But do the questions. Ask the questions that you can't see, right? What are some of the specific rules? What should I know about this league? Is there anything that you would say, hey, this is important to know?
There is one big thing too coming in new, especially to draft, is if there's any changes being made to the league, because sometimes you're the newbie and you're expecting this looking in the settings, and then come draft day it's like they've changed something that they've agreed on previously. So that
Right.
has happened personally to me, so it's like that is one important thing too. um
Yeah, it's the little things in fantasy. So it's not, and again, we're not trying to scare you away, but those are just, it gives you a leg up so you're not blindsided on draft day
mhm.
by a league rule that may be changed or you weren't aware of, or you just don't want to be surprised, especially on draft day, because it is, even though it's fun, it can be kind of stressful because that minute comes up and you're like, oh no, I don't know who to take, and then you start thinking about new rules and that kind of stuff. Make the draft fun because that's honestly my favorite day of the year. Like, I love draft day more than Christmas, so draft day should be fun, and that's what we're trying to get you to. All right, perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what I was hoping you would be able to tell me. Like, hey, what are you? I didn't even think about talking to the commissioner, but
Mhm.
those are important things. Um, well, we talked about it a little bit, so let's get into it now. what settings matter and what don't. So when you look in your league, what are the things that you're looking at going, this is important, but I don't care about this?
That one's interesting. So of course, scoring is going to be the most important. There is one thing that I will say that came up in my mind about drafts is if it's an online draft, which there's a lot. Pay attention to how long your draft clock is.
Yes.
Is I've made some like my league, that small league, is a very short, quick and fast. Like it's like 30 seconds. It's whatever the like it seemed like the minimum was to make it
Yeah.
challenging. And you don't want to come into that and expecting a minute and a half and it's only 30 seconds. So it's like once it gets into deeper rounds, and especially guys that know what they're doing, it'll go fast and it'll be back around at you again. So
Which we can get into the queue when we get a little bit further
mhm,
into the draft part, but that is an important thing. Yeah. Um, I will say that, the settings that don't matter, if we're being honest, is the points per yard. Um, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's a fractional scoring where every yard gets you a point 1 points, or if you only get 1 point for every 10 yards. It's not going to change anything because it's going to affect everyone equally, and it's not going to move rankings that much. The things that really do come into play are, how big is the league? How big is my bench? How many running backs and how many wide receivers can I start, right? Including your flex. So if it's a
mhm.
two running back, wide receiver, and a flex, I'm not as worried about my depth on my running backs and receivers because I can only start three at any given point, and I can't start more than that. Um, but if it's a four or three wide receiver league and a flex, I want to make sure I load up on wide receivers because I can start four potentially.
Yes.
Um, I want to know if it's a point per reception or a half point per reception. I want to know if it's 6 points for passing touchdowns or four. Uh, and those are the things you should really be looking at. Like, how much are touchdowns? Is there a difference between quarterback touchdowns and normal touchdowns?
Yes, yes. I wanted to bring that up. I don't mean to cut you off, but
No, go for it.
with the scoring on there for quarterbacks, it's some leagues are 4 points. It's the standard way, and some give the full 6 points, like how they do in the game. And that one is important because your 6 point quarterbacks sometimes in some leagues go a little bit higher because they're just going to score so many points.
So many
And
points.
yeah, but it kind of does even things out, between passing quarterbacks and rushing because, in the 4 point leagues, it's like dual threat quarterbacks that do produce. It's a little bit different, so they're valued differently.
Yeah, in a 4-point passing touchdown, I'm more interested in Josh Allen, and in a 6-point passing touchdown, I'm probably more interested in Patrick Mahomes
Mhm.
because the touchdown's at 6 points either way. Um, so those things can change your rankings, and that's why it's important, right? It's important to know those little details. I played in a league one year that 50-yard field goal was worth 20 points.
That
So I
that
took
is one
Justin
thing.
Tucker way high.
The bonuses, look
Right.
to see if the league asks, and you can look at this, but see what the bonuses are. Because if you do play in a bonus league, it's a little bit different. There's some varying degrees to it, but it's interesting to see how people want to do their bonuses and score. It's like if the 50-point touchdown worth 5 extra points on top of the touchdown, it's quite
Right.
quite a lot. So
So, and yeah, and in a league like that where that's going to happen, I'm interested in Tyreek Hill. He becomes my number one overall player because he scores so many long touchdowns.
yep,
Uh, I mean, yeah, you're kind of gambling, right? But if he scores a 50-yard touchdown, that touchdown gets you 5 points for the yards, 6 points for the touchdown, and then another 5 points. It's a 16-point play. Those can add up quickly.
yeah,
Um,
and it's quite
so
it's quite different too from PPR because PPR, half point or even PPR, it's like the receivers that are peppered, with targets, with catches, the doesn't really matter as much in standard leagues because
right.
there was a year I don't remember what was Deshaun Jackson's great year, and it's like he was just a long bomb dude, and that's it, and he carried my team. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Amon Ross not going to go as high as Tyreek Hill. ever, but he's also probably not going to be ranked as high if he's not in a PPR league.
Yep.
So those are important things, right? Those are the settings that matter, right? Figure out extra points, your bonus points. Figure out how much touchdowns cost. Is it a PPR league, a half point PPR, standard league? Is it a flex, a super flex? And then see, like I said, I played in a league where if a kicker kicked it 50 plus yards, I'm going to take a kicker way sooner than I ever would normally. But if I can get 20 points for a field goal, I'm gonna take it.
Just insane. That's so funny. There is what was the last thing I was gonna say? The uh jeez, I just lost it on the settings. Oh, look on your league for the trade deadline when it ends. Because I know some leave it standard, which is fine. Some let it go pretty far right up to when playoffs start. So that is one thing. When getting in the rhythm of things, kind of you might want to make trades and stuff like that. Look to when it ends.
Right. Exactly. And then also look, just last thing, look when your league is supposed to be drafting. Just know. Don't miss the draft because you weren't aware of that. Um, all right. So next thing. This one is just, what are the most common mistakes you see from new managers, right? What what do you normally see out of a new manager that you're just like, "Hey, this is we want to avoid that. We want these listeners to not have to make the mistakes that we see all the time."
There's a great one, and it's just one that came to mind.
Okay.
Kind of not understanding things. They're a little too green, and it's like sleepers. There's sleeper picks, and then there's managers that come in that will draft a backup that's the backup to the sleeper, and I've seen the most insane things.
So real quick, because you're saying sleeper, and I don't think we covered it. A sleeper
No,
is a player that we believe is has the potential to have a big season, but he's not on anybody's radar. The reason he's called a sleeper is because he's probably not the starter on his team. He's just we think with an
it's
injury to someone or something, he could have a
he's
big season.
yeah, they're either hyped or they would be like the next in line. And to be honest too, I've seen it completely the other way around. Like I've talked about this previously. Is like Patrick Mahomes taking over for Alex Smith. It's like it kind of they were like, Mahomes makes a lot of turnovers. It's like he throws the ball, but and it turned out he probably might be the greatest quarterback possibly ever. But we'll see. But yeah, it is interesting. The other thing I think I've already covered a little bit earlier was being unprepared and expecting every league to be what you were previously playing, or just kind of coming in without putting in the little effort just to understand things, how the league is, how scoring is, your roster and stuff like that. But I think that's probably the biggest mistakes I see. It's like, oh, not realizing it's fab instead of your standard waivers. That's a different aspect. You get into the little bit more advanced leagues, it's something you need to make sure that you see how it's designed in a sense.
Yeah, how's this league run? I will say so. Kind of going with our more new, the new side especially. The biggest mistakes I usually see from newer managers are they'll usually draft a quarterback a little too high, um, and that's just because in the real world, quarterbacks are the most important player on the field. In fantasy, unless you're in a super flex or two quarterback league, quarterback 1 and quarterback 10, there's not a massive point scoring difference. So you want to get the higher end running backs and wide receivers because wide receiver 2 or 3 is going to outscore wide receiver 20, which would be your second wide receiver by a wide margin.
Oh, good margin. Yeah, that's a
Right.
great
We're
point.
talking we're talking about 5 to 7 points a game more compared to the quarterbacks, which usually is between 5, maybe 7, if he's killing it and he's having an amazing season. Um, but there's not not a big difference between quarterback 1 and quarterback 10 or 12. Um, Again, if I'm in a super flex or 2 quarterback league, that changes because I have to start 2 of them and I want to get 2 higher end ones. But for the most part, that's not leagues people are playing in. Quarterbacks just should go notoriously a little bit lower. And the other mistake I see all the time, especially on draft day, is we see our queue, we see our lineup, and then we go, okay, I have a kicker, or I have 2 wide receivers, I have 2 running backs, I have my flex field, I have my tight end, and then they just start filling their starting lineup before they draft their extras, right? So you should be trying to fill your bench before you worry about your kicker and your defense and special teams. Those two, kicker and defensive special teams especially, should be your last 2 picks in the draft, because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it doesn't matter. There's not a difference between kickers. For the most part, you should stream those, and defense and special teams, because you should never sit with 2 kickers on your team, and you should never have 2
Oh, please.
defenses on your teams.
Yes,
So
don't. Please don't. You're wasting roster spots.
because every week is going to be different. I'm not going to draft a bad kicker, but there's only, if you're in a 10-team league, there's only 10 kickers coming off the board, and there's 32 teams in the NFL.
Yeah.
I just want to pick the guy who I think their offense is going to score a ton of points. And if you look at it, for the most part, besides Justin Tucker, which he's on a good offense, you're just going to see high-powered offenses, kickers get taken, because we don't know. Kicker is so, you know, interchangeable. If it's really windy or rainy or snowy, I don't want to have that kicker on my team
No, you
that
don't.
week. So I'm going to stream it. Um, those are the 2 biggest mistakes that I see quarterbacks taken way too early, right? Like, first pick is Patrick Mahomes, and that should never happen. You should be waiting on your quarterbacks. I'm not saying don't take Patrick Mahomes if you really want him, but take him later. And then the last thing, because it did pop in my head, try not to take your favorite team, all of the players,
Oh yeah.
right?
Don't be a homer.
Don't be a homer. And all we're saying is just don't take, if you're like, I'm a huge Dolphins fan, as everybody can see here. I don't want to take Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Devon Achane, even though I think all 3 of those players could be amazing. If they have a bad week, I'm gonna lose,
Oh yeah.
right? If
You
the Dolphins have a bad week, I've lost that week,
you live and die by it.
right?
To be fair though, there are times, and it's extremely rare, where you can have that. Like, let's say the 2013 Broncos is probably the last one. Maybe the Chiefs, if you think, Mahomes, Tyreek, and Kelsey, if you're those fans. But it's too rare to ever really
It's
see that.
less common than just doing the smart thing and not taking all the players on your team.
So generally, it's a bad idea. At least try to diversify just a little bit.
Yeah. So those are the biggest mistakes we see from new managers. So
Oh,
next thing I want to,
I
do you
got
have?
one more,
Okay,
one
shoot.
more. After the first week, for those that are new, it's like, if your players, especially higher drafted ones, if they do have a bad week, don't drop them to waivers. Please don't.
Yeah, just
It,
hold
it
them.
it'll be fine. Believe me, there's been times where I went 4 or 5 weeks without winning, and I wanted to drop everyone, and I didn't. And you still make the playoffs, because that first month is crazy.
Yeah, and injuries happen, and everybody's coming off training camp. They have to get in the groove. Um, yeah, I agree. That's a good one. Uh, all right, so let's jump into this. So the next part of this is, and we kind of touched on it, right? How to draft for your league. So we got into our settings, and I kind of touched on not taking a quarterback too high, unless you're in a 2 quarterback league. But let's really dive into that, right? So you said if you have a short clock, uh, or you said one of your leagues has a short clock,
Mhm.
we should talk about the queue, right? That the
Yep.
queue is an important aspect of fantasy. So go ahead and tell us what the queue is, Aaron.
Yeah, so the queue on online drafts is open before your draft. There's a time that it opens, and you can add players in every version in Yahoo and ESPN, anything. You can add players to a queue that you like, and you can have them in the order in case, you happen to auto draft too. So that does happen. If you run out of time, it will select the top player out of your queue if you queue them, if it's having to star them or whatever. And it is important. I did get my league to do that, and they actually like that a lot. As it's like they're kind of like, oh, I'm gonna look on my laptop, but I'm gonna draft on my phone, or vice versa. And it's like having the queue set up, it doesn't take much time because it's like generally you can add majority of players you're really interested in within that, half an hour before your draft. And it's like if you want to go beforehand and kind of get things set up to where you can just add them quickly, it's like do it.
The other thing I love about the queue, so as you get more advanced, you can do it however you want. I like to put in the beginning the sleepers that I'm interested in, because when you're in the draft in the heat of the moment, there's just players you forget about, right? Like,
Mhm.
hey, I really love George Pickens this year. Oh, I forgot about him and he got picked and I wasn't paying attention. But the other reason I like to use the queue is if I know there's 5 players I like and there's 4 people ahead of me, I like to put all 5 in order in my queue and rank them just in case I miss something or my internet goes down, you know? So
Right.
I do a quick little, okay, these are the next 5 players I want. If something happens, it'll auto draft one of those players out of my queue, but I got one of the players I wanted. It's no big deal, and I can usually get back on before anything bad happens. Um, just using the queue to your advantage. The other thing when we really talk about this though, and that's just using Yahoo and ESPN and all those places, they all have a queue. Use those things to your advantage. Um, but drafting for your league, right? So we've talked about standard, we've talked about PPR, and we've talked about superflex or 2 quarterbacks. Each one of those should have a different draft strategy. So it's draft day. You're in a PPR league. I'm sure Aaron would agree with this. Wide receivers go up a little bit more,
Mhm.
right?
Definitely.
Or running backs that catch out of the backfield.
Absolutely.
Alvin Kamara should be ranked a little bit higher than David Montgomery in a PPR format. But in a standard league, I'm probably taking David Montgomery before I take Alvin Kamara,
Yeah, that'd be
because
a lot closer in rankings. Yeah.
now know your league settings and then know what you need to look for. So in both of those cases, in a standard and a PPR, I'm still not taking a quarterback until round 3 at the earliest. No matter if it's 6 points or 4 points. I'm not doing it. I most likely am waiting on quarterback and just trying to grab one of my top 7 or 7 of my top 10. So 7 through 10, just trying to grab someone in there. I'm not going to be the one who, unless quarterback value falls to me, is going to take somebody, right? So if Josh Allen is sitting there in the 4th round, I'll take him. Now, in a super flex under 2 quarterback, that completely changes. And I'm sure I've been in a ton. Aaron, you've done some super flex leagues, correct?
Yeah.
So how would you say those drafts mostly go?
Oh, those ones. Super flex is generally you'll see quarterbacks definitely go a lot hotter, since you're able to start them, at that position, and they do get more points. I would say the aspects of it change a little bit for super flex for that reason, and it they're fun. It's nothing to be
Yeah.
worried about.
So I look at it in a 2 quarterback league or a super flex league. If I'm playing in a 12 team or a 10 team league, there's only 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL. There's only about 17 I really like. So I want to get 2 of those 17 so I don't have to worry about quarterback. I'm okay in a super flex taking a quarterback in the first 2 rounds.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That
So yeah, and this is
that's
why we talk about
completely different.
yeah, that's why we talk about
Generally.
know your draft, right? Because you don't want to be in the super flex league and the your team looks great, except you don't have quarterbacks. So every week you're trying to band-aid in, a quarterback that you don't believe in, right? We
It's
don't want
rough.
to be starting JJ McCarthy. We don't know if he's good yet. I don't want him on the team. Those are the kind of players you're kind of like, oh, I guess I'm starting Sam Darnold this week because it sounds like he's the Minnesota Vikings starter. You don't want
Right.
to be that player. It's way better to have a Brock Purdy and Patrick Mahomes than one or neither of those guys. All right, so base just know your league, draft accordingly. Okay, and like we said, if you follow us, we're going to help you get through. We're going to talk to you guys about all the players that we think are good, where they're going. That's kind of where we specialize. We want to talk about who you should be looking for in what rounds. Okay, so that's the point of this show. But today's show is just to help you get ready for fantasy and enjoy it, just like us. All right.
Oh yeah.
So you've drafted your team. You feel fantastic. Now the next step. What are you doing and how are you picking your starting lineup for week one? I know I have my strategy, but I want to hear yours.
That one's always tough. That one's always probably the toughest thing because me, it seems like it varies year to year. There's times where I'm starting how I drafted, exactly how it is. I'm not changing out anyone because generally the way it breaks down how it gets filled into the roster is fine. Sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
You really got to see, there's there's a lot. There's that's a complex question. I like
Well,
that question.
so let's keep it simple, right? I agree with you. When I draft my team in a 3 wide receiver, 2 running back league, I'm probably only drafting 1 quarterback.
Mhm,
I've drafted 2 running backs early-ish, so those 2 are my starters.
mhm,
I'm starting my 3 receivers that I took higher,
mhm.
obviously my tight end. And then when I get to my flex, that's kind of the important play, right? The flex is one of those positions where you might go, hey, if in a PPR, I'm probably going to start a receiver. But
Yeah.
in a standard league, I might look to see if I have a good starting running back I can throw into that spot. Um, so in a standard league, I probably am going to draft a little bit more running back heavy than I am in a PPR league. But that's probably going to be what my flex spot looks like. Really, I think your flex should be the only thing you question on week one. Don't
Ye
overthink it.
yeah, don't overthink it, and also when I don't know if we talked about this at all, it was projections, because you will see some wonky projections where it's like, for some reason, this guy looks like he's only gonna score 7 points and he should be, in the double digits, and switching him out, to someone else that looks like they might score a little bit more. It's like, kind of you gotta be able to read into that because there's projections will mess with everyone.
Yeah, so that is a great point, and that's why I don't look at the projections as much, right? So when we get to projections, all they're saying is it's the website you're using, Yahoo, ESPN. Um, they're
Uh,
projecting what they think that week they're going to do.
mhm.
That's not necessarily true, and more times than not, it's not true. Um, you have to kind of trust your gut a little bit when you even if you're looking at it. I've been on both sides where my projected points are higher than my opponent and I lose, and my projected points are way lower than my opponent and I win. Um, you just kind of have to trust your gut. Find the analyst you believe. Hopefully it's us, but find the analyst you believe and follow their rankings. Just whatever you believe is the right way to go, but do that. Don't fall for the projections. And that goes from draft day, dude. Projections are just what they think they're going to do.
And there is one thing too, and it's really rare for week one is kind of look at the weather for some players. Is it going to be a rainy game, or if like kickers? There's some storms that are terrible, and it's like I'm probably going to drop that kicker because it's a
Yeah.
nasty windy game. So
Florida, especially in
mhm.
in that hurricane season, you
Yep.
never know what you're going to run into. So that's a great call. And don't be afraid to drop your kicker or your defense. They're at the end of the day, it's probably not going to change too much. When you draft the defense, just see what their week one matchup is. That's really all that matters. Find the defense that is playing a terrible offensive team or who you think it would be a terrible offensive team. Um, last thing and this is just quick. We want to get you from I haven't played fantasy to I can at least get to week one of fantasy. That was the whole point of this show. We wanted you to just feel comfortable in playing and joining a league. Um, After week one and you're getting into the waiver wire, you're going to have to drop 1 or 2 players. Just remember the players you drafted in those late rounds, unless they're killing it, those are the players you're trying to get rid of. So don't feel bad if you got to cut your 14th round pick. Those are the players you drafted. And if somebody's taking off, those are the guys you want to get on, especially statistically speaking. the players found in weeks 1 through 3 on the waiver wire are more likely to be the league winners than the players found later than that. So sometimes you do want to cut bait a little bit sooner, especially early in the season. But I mean, that's really all I have. Is there anything you really want to kind of emphasize, Aaron, before we let them go?
Let's see. We've ran through quite a lot.
We've given you all a ton of information, and again, I hope you enjoy it. You can share this with your friends, and everybody can gain a little bit from it.
I don't know if I have anything at the top of my mind. Let me
That's
think on that. It's like
that
there is a lot. It comes
there
down to
is. It's a lot, and again, the reason of this show was just to get you guys ready. If you watch out some of our other shows, you will see a lot more information, but at least you'll be able to keep up with us and not have the question of what is ADP or what are they talking about when they talk about QB1. You'll be there. But if you don't have anything,
it's like they can always, drop us a DM, ask too. It's like that's
yeah,
one thing. I was like, I'm sure there's so many things that we probably didn't even cover. That's just
right.
not at the top of my mind. That it's like
So
kind of autopilot.
right. So follow us on X, Three Dudes FFS. Here's our Instagram. Yes, it is long, but we do post a lot of short content on there. You can DM us there. Obviously, you are watching us on YouTube. Please like, subscribe. We are trying to grow this, and we're just trying to be there for, especially the new guys. We're here. We want to answer questions. We're trying to be helpful, make this fantasy thing fun for everyone, not just oh, I joined this league because my work asked me to. So reach
Right.
out to us, ask us questions, DM us. We are more than willing to answer, and we will talk to you as much as we possibly can. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode though, and you learned something new. Even if you're a longtime fantasy player, you learned a little bit something here. So other than that, peace.
Later.